Hey everyone, welcome to episode 14 of Better Late, the podcast about adult gymnastics. A quick disclaimer, this episode talks about eating disorders, including anorexia and bulimia. I don't talk a lot on this podcast about the abuse scandals that have been uncovered in gymnastics in the US and in other countries. There are many other podcasts that do a very fine job covering those stories, so I focus on the athletic part of our sport. However, talking about it is inevitable because it affects the culture of our entire sport and will continue to inform how the state of gymnastics, including adult gymnastics, evolves. I recently met Andrea Orris through the adult gymnastics community in Los Angeles. Andrea is a former elite level gymnast from Texas, and she went on to compete for Illinois State and then coach the ISU team for a few years. Now, she's a club coach and stretch coach in LA and virtually. One of her recent social media posts went viral when Andrea revealed her personal history with eating disorders as a young elite gymnast. We talked about her journey moving beyond trauma and abuse, the comparison culture that's rampant in gymnastics and social media, and how to make gymnastics a more conventional exercise option for adults. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks so much for joining me, Andrea.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell me about your gymnastics journey. I know that you competed in college. What was the path that led you there? And what have you been doing since then?
Yeah, so I did club gymnastics. I actually started kind of late for a gymnast. I started when I was 7, almost 8. And I actually lived in Colorado at the time that I started. And then my family moved to Texas. So I took like a year off. So I really didn't start gymnastics till I was 8 or 9. And then immediately I caught on pretty quick and they put me on the competitive team right away before I really knew what it was. I skipped through the levels really fast. It's a little bit different now. They changed the way level 4, 5, and 6 works. But at the time I went immediately to level 5 and then I did level 6 for 2 seasons. And then from level 6, I skipped to level 9. And then from level 9, I skipped to elite.
Whoa.
And then I did elite for 1 year. And then I went back down to level 10. And I did level 10 for like 4 or 5 seasons until I ended up in college. As a level 10, I made it to JO Nationals twice. I got a full ride to Illinois State University. I honestly had a rough start there, but because the time I got to my freshman year of college, I was very, very burnt out and hadn't really trained for pretty much an entire year before I started my college season. And my college coaches didn't know that when I got there.
Why was that? Did you taking a break?
I got really burnt out mentally, physically, emotionally. I did have the stereotypical eating disorders that a lot of elite gymnasts go through. And my eating disorders were so severe that I got to the point where my heart was failing. I had a leaking heart valve and an enlarged aorta just from anorexia, bulimia, all that.
No.
I was on complete bed rest for a whole month my senior year of high school. It was just a really crazy year. And so by the time I got to college, like I hadn't done gymnastics in about a year. And my college coaches were just totally amazing and understanding and cool about it. I was scared that they would be mad and kick me off the team, but they were like, no, like you have so much gymnastics left in you. Like you can do this. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, let's do it. And so my freshman year was a little rough. I just competed beam and bars that year, but I made it through season. And that freshman year really restored my love and passion for gymnastics. And then I continued on through my senior year. I got athlete of the year my senior year. It was just really memorable and amazing. And I ended gymnastics on such a high note. I was in love with it again. And I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to retire, but that was in 2010. There was nothing like that out there that existed in 2010 of continuing gymnastics after college. Maybe there is now, or maybe that's what you're building. If there would have been something like that at the time, I 100% would have been a part of it. But yeah, I just retired after senior year and I wanted to stay in the sport. So I coached club level, which I'm still doing now. I'm going on 11 years of coaching club gymnastics. And then I also did coach NCAA at ISU for 3 seasons. And here I am.
Well, that's a really fascinating journey. And I kind of want to go back to what you said a little bit at the beginning, which is crazy, but it does sound familiar. So you talked about doing like skipping through all those levels, which sounds really insane. Do you think if you had it's hard to kind of look back and project how it might have gone differently. But do you think if you had done 1 year at a time and just progressed at that rate, it would have been less likely that you would have burned out? Or was that just so common for any gymnast who had any bit of talent at your gym?
Um, Burnout is extremely common in level 9, 10 elite gymnastics, even in the lower levels than that. But especially once you get to level 9, I would say is when I see the most burnout with the kids I coach. Going back with my adult brain now, yes, I wish I would have been paced better. When that's happening, when you're a gymnast, you're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. So like you're not making that call for yourself. Your coaches are making that call for you. So I do wish
exciting at the time.
me differently. What?
I was saying, and it's probably really exciting at the time because it's like being put in class in school.
You know, I was tired and like had some pain, but it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't till a couple years of it that I couldn't handle it anymore, just physically and mentally and emotionally. I actually surprisingly didn't have a ton of mental blocks, even though I was pushed really fast. I just naturally was kind of a freak. Like my older sister was a cheerleader, and I remember so vividly, like I used to do roundup, I can't swing back tucks and layouts in my front yard with my sister just because I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
At practice, I had never ever been introduced to back twisting or anything like that. And I was doing back layouts in my yard with my sister. And she was like, you should do a full. And I was like, what is a full? And she was like, it's just the layout you're doing, but you do a full twist before you land. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just ran and did a roundabout handspring full and landed perfectly. And I just knew how to do it. Like, it was just really strange. Awesome. So I didn't have the mental blocks that a lot of people do get from being rushed like that. Because like I said, I was a really weird case, but emotionally it had repercussions, and physically we had to be homeschooled to be on the team I was on. We were training 8 hours a day from age 11 until I graduated high school at age 18. We practiced 8 to 12 in the morning, and then we did school that was, it was a little school literally built for our gym, a mile away from our gym. And we did that from 12:30 to 3, so 2.5 hours of school, and it was only 4 days a week. And then we went back to the gym, which again was only 1 mile away, and we would go right back to practice 4 to 7, be home by 8 or so, eat dinner, go to bed, and then just repeat. So that's how we were able to skip levels like that, as we trained nearly 40 hours a week from 3rd, 4th, 5th grade until high school. So it was just a really intense situation. I got a little off track. I don't even remember your original question for me.
Oh, no, you covered it. I was asking about like you definitely weren't paced in a linear way.
Yeah, I wish I would have been paced. And I try to do that a lot as a coach now because, you know, you always try to be the adult that you needed when you were younger. I don't know if you've heard that quote, but I'm like, oh, I needed to be paced. Like it destroyed me emotionally and physically. And it did lead into my eating disorders for sure. Cause I also had a coach being like, your performance is suffering because of your body. It wasn't something I came up with on my own. It was like, you know, when an adult is telling you all the time, hey, your goal is to be the best gymnast you can be. And to be a better gymnast, you've got to be tinier. Like, you know, of course that's going to mess with you. Yeah. But yeah, I just try to let my kids play more of a role in their own gymnastics than I had. I let them make choices. I say, hey, you need a D element. Here are some D elements. Which ones do you like? Instead of saying, you have to get your front aerial. This is your beam routine, or else you're not competing. Stuff like that. So I think giving them choices and stuff gives them more longevity in the sport as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you're comfortable talking about it, you talked about some of the medical issues, and you had a year in between high school and starting your gymnastics career in college. Mm-hmm. What has your journey been dealing with an eating disorder that was spurred on by a lot of, it sounds like, horrible feedback from a coach?
It's okay. So, and again, this all started when I had a child brain. I didn't have a fully developed brain like I do now as an adult, so I didn't totally understand it at the time. But looking back now in hindsight, I can articulate it a bit better. So let me just rewind a little bit. It did start because my coach was like, I remember it clear as day, the day it started. I did a blind change and I fell on the incorrect side of the bar. I didn't go over in the handstand. And my coach called me over and he was like, do you know why you fell on that blind change? Looking back, I'm probably like, oh, because I tapped too early or not aggressive enough or something like that. But of course, his answer was, it's because you're gaining weight in your butt. But it's okay. There's ways to fix that and it'll help you get over the bar. And he told me to weigh myself every single day, starting that day. And he told me to go to bed hungry and that was okay and it wasn't bad for you. And then he also told me that anytime we had a competition, not to eat dinner 3 nights before every meet. And again, when I'm 11 years old being told this, I'm like, oh, okay. Because this guy has Olympic medals and he's coached world and Olympic champions. So I was like, sure, he knows what he's talking about. So that just started a downward spiral. It started with anorexia. And then I got too tired of being anorexic. It was so hard to not eat. And I wasn't disciplined to do that anymore. So then I started being bulimic because then I was like, I can eat, but then you just throw it up after. And so yeah, that started when I was about 11 or 12. And by the time I was 17, I had already committed with my scholarship to Illinois State at this point. And I just really just hit this point where I was like, I can't do this for one more day. I had been living like this for about 4 or 5 years now at this point, not eating, but when I do eat, I throw it up. And it was just really bad. And I told my parents one day, because I just got really scared that when I went to college that I was gonna die. I was like, when I go to college and I don't have my support system, I was just like, what am I gonna do without them? Like, will I live like this? I don't know. And so I was like, hey, mom and dad, like before I go to college, I just want you to know that like, this is what I do. I have all these eating disorders. Like, I need help. And they were really shocked. They honestly didn't know. And so that day they took me to, I don't even know if it was like a psychologist or a counselor or what's the difference. I don't really know who they took me to, but they took me to some professional. And I told them everything I had been doing. And that day I thought I was going to go talk to this person and then go home. I think my parents initially thought that too. But that day I was put into an intensive inpatient rehab program. So I talked with the professional and then they were like, P.S. you're not going home today. And I was like, what? It was just a complete shock to my reality. I was put into a rehab program. I was 17, so I was a minor. So there was nothing I could do about it. I wanted to go home, but I couldn't legally go home. And so I spent a little bit of time in there. And then eventually my sister helped me talk my parents out of making me stay there. And so then I transitioned to an outpatient program. So I was at home, but I was on bed rest at home, like 1 month, 30 days. I wasn't even allowed to get off the couch. My parents had to carry food to me, stuff like that. I wasn't allowed to use the bathroom without the door open because I had to have eyes on me at all time, day and night, just to make sure I wasn't starving myself or throwing up my food in the bathroom, stuff like that. And I was on bed rest because I couldn't pass a stress test for my heart. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but they hook you up to like an EKG and all these things, and you have to walk on a treadmill, and your heart rate has to be at a certain, your heart rate and blood pressure have to be at a certain number to pass. I couldn't pass it. So I was on bed rest and to fix my leaking heart valve and my enlarged aorta. And after that month was up, I took another stress test and I still didn't pass it, but it was better. So I didn't have to be on bed rest anymore, but I wasn't allowed to exercise still. And so I went back to the gym to tell my coach that I could be in the gym, but that I wasn't allowed to work out. And he didn't really understand. There was kind of a language barrier, but not really. But he was like, what do you mean? Like, you can't pass the stress test. Like, can't you like study for it and pass it so you can work out? And I was like, no, like, it's like testing my organs. Like, it's not that kind of a test. And he just didn't understand what I was trying to tell him. And so he made me like condition still, even though I hadn't passed the stress test yet. And I was too scared to tell him that I couldn't. And it was just bad. But I ended up just turning 18, and I didn't actually finish the rehab program, but I left anyways because I turned 18. And I still continued with my bad eating disorder behaviors until I went to college. And then when I went to college, it stopped. I wasn't happy with my body when I went to college, and then all of a sudden all my problems were gone. But being away from my gymnastics coach in that environment made me realize how much my eating disorder was psychological, because I was like, oh, as soon as I was away from this man, I didn't do that anymore. So I gained a lot of weight, which I wasn't okay with at the time, but I now realize my body needed that. I know this sounds really crazy and kind of cult-like, but I was around people my age and my normal size for the first time. But because I was homeschooled, I wasn't around people my age often, except for the other girls that I trained with who were also teeny tiny in my size. So being in college my freshman year and being around people with different kinds of bodies made me realize that I'm not this huge, humongous, large person like I thought I was. Because, you get body dysmorphia when you have eating disorders too. And I just thought I was huge. But yeah, I started getting over it. And my college coaches were super cool about it and understanding. And they never talked to me about my weight ever. And they talked to me about how, like, just to view food as fuel for your performance, not as calories or weight loss or weight gain. And they were just like, eat foods that give you energy for practice. And I was always told that the less you eat, the lighter you will feel, so the more energy you'll have, which obviously was terrible, misguided information. But yeah, it was just like nutrition education and honestly having nice coaches that cared about me. It just over time helped cure my eating disorder. It wasn't like one day I was better all of a sudden. It took me like a solid 2 or 3 years to relearn how to eat when I was hungry and stop when I was full. But yeah, I eventually figured it out. And it was just being in an environment of coaches that were nice and giving me like correct nutrition information.
Yeah.
So that was my eating disorder story.
Wow. Well, first it seems odd for me to use the word choice commend, but to tell your parents about it. I mean, that's not easy for any child to open up to their parents about anything that they haven't been like, you knew it wasn't like the healthiest thing. It's a good choice that you were making and you still told them. And it sounds like, I mean, that was, thank God that you got the immediate.
That I got help right away.
That you got. So that's great. And it's great to hear that you had the support system in college, and you're right. It took you right out of the environment. And I think it reminds me that the gymnastics culture is so insidious that I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because I've always had weight issues. I mean, I'm 5'1". I've never really like weighed, like I've never been obese or really like overweight, but when I was stuck in preteen for 3 years, I mean, I wanted to be a gymnast so badly because I'd done it a little bit a few years before then when I was 9, and then we had to move. So I spent a year waiting for us to like buy a house so I could we would have a stable place to live and I could train. But I remember like those 3 years, like always obsessively comparing myself to all the elites in the gym. Cause I was like, as soon as I make team, I know what track I need to be on. I mean, I knew like, I think I used to even like take notes like, oh, like it sounds like such a stalker, but I prefer to think of it more like Harriet the Spy. And like, I was like taking notes about all the elite gymnasts and like what leotard, it sounds so weird, but I think like that, like I look back on my photos of myself from years ago and I'm like, I've always been skinny, but I've always thought that I wasn't. But you're right. It's like, when you said it sounds like you're in a cult because you were 18 when you were first around normal bodied humans who aren't trying to cram as much elite level performance in their body before they're 16 or 18. So it really is a kind of scary environment that can be created under the wrong guidance. Thanks for sharing that story, Andrea. And now you're 32, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though you're not in the elite gymnastics world, like as a competitor, I think the way our just culture is and how everybody's obsessed with becoming a social media or TikTok star, and especially like we live in LA, how do you deal with that pressure that can kind of always be like on the outskirts, even if you're not actively participating and even if you're not actively trying to be like a TikTok star? I feel like that pressure is always there, that perfection.
Yeah. I mean, I can proudly say that I learned my lesson. I saw where that mentality took me. It quite literally almost killed me, trying to please someone and idolize a person, not to get all religious or anything, but to idolize a person that is not God, it really can mess you up as a human. And you'll always see yourself feeling unsatisfied with yourself if you idolize something other than God. That's how I view it personally. I don't want to push that on anyone, but I idolized a coach, or you idolize a body, or you idolize an amount of money you want to make. You idolize an apartment you want. You idolize a girl that you want to have as many followers as her. And when you do things like that, you're always going to be empty. You're always going to be wanting more. You're never going to feel satisfied or full with yourself ever. And so I just know that since I literally hit rock bottom at such a young age, I did develop those tools to never let myself get there ever again. I was like, I put my entire self-worth in my coach's approval. And that brought me to a very dangerous place. So I do see kids, teens, adults doing that today with this Instagram, TikTok environment that you're talking about. I see it happen all the time. I try to use my Instagram to be as authentic as I can. I very recently came out about my eating disorder just a couple months ago on my Instagram. 3 years ago, I told my mom for the first time that happened. She knew I had an eating disorder. Obviously, I was in rehab, but she had no idea how it was like my coach enforcing it or all of like the mental trauma behind it. She had no idea. She was shocked. And so I do see that happening today, just like people getting sucked into that, like, I have to be this, I have to be this, I have to be this. So I try to be really authentic on mine. And I'm just like, okay, it's not that I want to talk about myself, but I know other people are doing what I did in my teens. And I need to show people that, like, you don't have to do that to find happiness. In fact, that it will take you down the opposite path. Like, that will take you to extreme emptiness and depression, anxiety. Like, comparison is like a root of so many evils. It really can mess with your confidence and self-worth. So yeah, you just have to be authentically yourself, you know?
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing that up. And
this is our culture problem. The gymnastics narrative is that we are constantly being compared to our teammates, or to the age you should be at this level, or to a score, or to what you did at the last meet. Stuff like that. It's a sport of comparison. I know you didn't even want to talk about the culture, and we're kind of totally getting there. So if you want to just listen, keep going. But
well, yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's so important from my perspective, and a lot of other adult gymnasts that have come on have talked about this, is that if you can make the sport accessible and available to adults who do have that fully developed brain, and they have that perspective, and hopefully are making choices for themselves and not having them thrust upon them, whether by parents or whether just because by the fact that they're really talented. I think a lot of kids like feel like, oh, if you're like they're made to feel like, oh, if you have this talent, you have to pursue this because who knows if you had, I mean, I kind of felt
Yeah.
like that too when I was pressured to study like math and science in college because
Yeah.
I was good at it. But if you can make gymnastics accessible to adults, then I think that means it's going to be healthier and more fun for kids, because adults have to choose and say yes. You can't put an adult in an environment that you are talking about. No adult's going to put up with, I have to weigh myself every day. I can't eat for 3. Are you kidding? I have a family to take care of, or I have a job. They have that perspective that kids don't have, and kids shouldn't have to have that perspective. That's why they're, why they're kids.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting that you bring up the narrative, because like you said, it's rife for comparison and one linear path. That's a problem with a sport that's like, in a sport where you're always trying to win. As soon as somebody thinks that they cracked the code on something, and this is the formula that will get gold medals, they just want to keep repeating that. And they don't want to experiment with other ways that might be just as effective and healthier. But you sound like you have attained a really healthy perspective in the sport. And I'm so glad that you are still involved in the sport as a coach. You talked about how the transition and the sense of a loss in identity that happened after you stopped competing in college. How has that been like? And now I know that you're coaching more, you're a stretch coach, and you're about to or have already launched some programs. How has that transition been, and what do you like? How have you found your place in gymnastics?
I think it keeps just coming back to the culture thing. The whole like normalize adult gymnastics. I think like I had that identity crisis because we're so ingrained at a very, very young age that you have to peak at gymnastics before puberty, and it's only a sport for young people, and it's only a sport for a child's body, and once you go through puberty you're not going to be as good. And so I had that mentality in my brain for years, and that's why when I got to college I thought I was going to suck. But when my coaches were like, no, you're really good, like we can do this, I was like, oh. And I did the best gymnastics I've ever been. I started college with the mentality of I cannot wait for this to be over. I ended college with the mentality of I want to keep going. And there was nowhere for me to go. And I think that the more of us out there like you and I that still love gymnastics out there that are doing it and trying to reach other people and build that community, I think the more normal it will get. I feel like we kind of need to take steps backward in the gymnastics community, and I'm not really sure how to do that. But if you look back at gymnastics in the 70s and the 80s, those were grown women doing gymnastics. I mean, the equipment's changed, like stuff like that. So there's some things that need to be different, but those were adult bodies. And then when Nadia Comaneci happened and she got the first perfect 10 and she was so famous after that, she had a little girl's body. And that's when that trend started happening and everyone started to want to look like Nadia. And then all of a sudden it just started getting like smaller and smaller and smaller. Even adults like us too, I feel like it is kind of a stigma similar to like saying like a male can't be a ballerina. Like, yes, they can if they want, and they're really, really good at it because they're so strong. Like they can do anything. It's the same thing with women's gymnastics. It's like, no, you can only be a really good women's gymnastics if you have like no body fat and you're super light. I'm like, that's not true. Like you can put on more weight and more muscle mass and be better and punch the board harder and do more. So I do think, even though it's a very, very small community, yeah, the more we like make it public, make it a thing, make it fun, put it out there, the more people that I think will want to join and think it's cool and also see that they can do it. Because also in our society, yeah, like you think of gymnastics and you think of the Olympics and you think of teeny tiny little girls, but that's not all that gymnastics is. It's doing a handstand is gymnastics. That's in CrossFit. Adults do CrossFit, usually not little kids. Like, why isn't it normal? I think also when people think gymnastics, like, yeah, they just think Olympics, they think full routines, they think crazy skills, double backs. I'm like, no, gymnastics is a handstand, a split, a cartwheel. I think we can make very, very basic gymnastics more popular in adults. And I think it would catch on really fast because it's unconventional training and everyone wants to be in good shape and be strong and be toned and have muscle tone. But it's boring. Lifting to me is boring. Some people really enjoy it, and that's cool. It's boring, and also for me, I'm really self-conscious doing it. I don't like going to the gym. I don't know proper lifting technique without a coach, and I feel really silly. So I think just having more unconventional ways to train, like gymnastics, can really just get popular, and I think a lot of people want to do it.
Are a lot of the people that come into your coaching programs, are a lot of them former gymnasts? Do you ever get any gymnast or adults who have just really always wanted a handstand or splits?
Yeah, I get way more people wanting to stretch than to do adult gymnastics. And again, because I think I'm battling that it's just not normalized. So people are like, I can't do that. I'm like, yeah, you can. But yeah, it's a lot of former gymnasts being like, yeah, I was a gymnast or I did cheerleading or I danced and I had my splits when I was in high school, but I haven't tried it in 10 years and I want to see if I can do it again. That's a large base of my clients, and it's so fun watching like the nostalgia they get so happy and excited, and because it's fun, gymnastics is fun. Like conventional exercise in the gym sometimes can be fun, but it's not always fun and it is always the same. You're just kind of changing the reps. But like going upside down, swinging on a bar, doing a flip, jumping on a trampoline, like that's a blast no matter how old you are. And I do wish, that there was just more of that existed.
If somebody who's listening to this has never tried gymnastics before and thinks that a handstand or splits are just out of their reach because of some myth, because of some fitness myth that says, oh, after a certain age, your hips can't handle have a flexibility. What would you say to them?
I don't have a super scientific response for you, but I will say that in my 30s now, I've been coaching gymnastics forever, but I've been only teaching adults and teaching these stretch classes for about 1 year. I started training my splits again, and I am more flexible now than I was in my entire elite gymnastics career. I really am. My oversplits, which is what I mainly train, I got them down on 7 yoga blocks.
Oh my God. What?
Yeah. So when I very first started I took the classes first, I loved it, and then I wanted to teach it. So when I took the class, I just kind of got my splits back down. I got it to 2 or 3 blocks on an oversplit. I kept taking the classes. I got to 4. I took more classes. I got to 5. When I got to about 5 blocks, I was like, okay, this is back to like the peak shape that I was in when I was a gymnast, is about 5 yoga blocks. I did have my oversplits before, and I got it back in a couple weeks, but I had never gone past that point. And after like several months of taking the classes, I got up to 7 yoga blocks, and that was the biggest oversplit I've ever done in my whole entire life, way past anything I ever did in elite level training. So from my personal experience, I think it's absolutely possible. You just literally have to work on it. Usually adults don't work on it. They're not training their splits every week.
Right. It is something you have to be consistent at. I've had my splits a few different days in my life. Like I would get them, and then the next day, if I didn't stretch it the next day, which like in my mid-20s when I was competing, I just didn't do it every day because I was also working. I would lose it, and it would just be so frustrating. Like, so yeah, one of my goals is to get it and just keep it. I've literally had dreams where I'm like,
I love that.
Sitting in my split, and in the dream, like, wow, this is so easy. It's like, I feel like it's one of those things where it only hurts when you don't have it all the way down, because then you have all that tension in your body.
Yeah, but once you get it, it feels awesome.
You can follow Andrea on Instagram at Andrea Orris. That's AndreaOrris. Thanks for listening to this episode of Better Late. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It really does help. If you have guest or episode suggestions, send an email to betterlatepod, that's BETTERLATEPOD @gmail.com.